Aloha and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Got Your Six podcast. This six-question podcast brings together high performers to share their methods, strategies, and ideas, delivered in an informative and, most importantly, actionable way that'll help you lead yourself and those around you from the battlefield to the boardroom. Coming to you every episode, I'm your host, Tony Nash. And into the breach.
Nothing mentioned on this podcast is an endorsement or opinion of the Department of Defense.
I got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. Got your six, we got your back. I got your six.
Sixers, what an absolute treat we have today. Not only is he a feat of strength, not even a finalist. He's done it. He went out there. So we have that 10,000 connection, award-winning war journalist, Navy SEAL, athlete, Harvard graduate. I could just spend the whole episode just going around your accolades. But we have Kaj Larsen with us today. Kaj, thank you so much for being on the Got Your Six podcast.
Yeah, it's such an honor to be here. I'm glad we made it happen.
Absolutely. We've been talking back and forth for a while, so it's cool we can finally get together. One thing that's really fascinating, you've been in the Navy since 2000, but you were also, doing that dual hat role as a reservist. You were living life as a journalist, going out and doing this incredible work with, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, Vice, Huffington Post. Obviously, the list goes on. But also being a Navy SEAL, there's got to be stuff, or at least one thing you've constantly implemented throughout your time in the military, also in that civilian world, as you kind of play that both roles.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I was in this unique position where I had to jump back and forth across the line between my civilian life and my team life. Look, to be clear, I think when I was on active duty, when I graduated BUDS, when I went to my first SEAL team, I was like head down. That was the job. That was the mission. And then postgraduate school, when I transferred over to the reserve side, that's when I had to wear these two different hats. And in some ways they're opposite. I say I traded my gun for a camera. But in some ways there's so many parallels. And I think the common thread between what I do in the civilian world and then my military career was a sense of mission and purpose. I mean, even the way we connected, both being 10,000 athletes, I now conduct business with brands and people who are congruent with my values. And I think that's why I attach myself to 10,000. I feel like that's why you attach yourself to 10,000. And that's how our connection happened. And when you live by your values and you live with mission and purpose, all of these amazing things happen in your life.
Right. And that mission and purpose allows you, and I think you embody this so well, is that excellence and habit, right? Where you constantly are doing the same thing repetitively, but it's essentially do less better. And you do that so well. Where does that come from? Is that something you took away from your time in the service, or is it something you grew up with around your sister and your family?
Yeah, there's this old nature nurture argument. Certainly, when I think about my sister, she's extraordinarily successful. Excellence does kind of is an expectation. It's a tacit expectation, but it's an expectation in my family. What I say is that my great-grandfather served in the Tsar's army, actually in the Tsar's band in Russia. And my grandfather was in the Navy band in World War II. He was actually stationed at Pearl Harbor. But I'm basically tone deaf and can't play an instrument. So I had to be excellent at being a commando. That was my mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it was just something ingrained in you in that communication, from your family the entire time, continue to just work at what feels right to you, that fills you with fulfillment at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think both of us have been schooled in the art of service-oriented leadership and servant leadership. And that's really important to me. I think there comes a point in everyone's life where you have to ask yourself how you want to be of service once you've achieved certain milestones and stuff. And for me, that first took the route of military service, and then it second took the route of public service in my civilian life. So I do think a commitment to excellence and to purpose helps you on whatever trajectory you are in life. It helps magnify and raise that bar even higher.
Right. And like you said, as a servant leader, you have that vision, which allows everyone to kind of rally around. And a key component of servant leadership is humility, right? So is there a talent or skill that you're working on? I know you just launched Guild. You're part of that founding team, which is a trusted Guild, which is a trusted investment platform inspiring the military community to secure financial freedom through training and education. Is that something that you're really working on? It's kind of new to you, or is there something else?
It's actually brand new to a degree. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said humility. And trust me, being a startup fintech entrepreneur is a humbling experience. Like, you don't know what you don't know until you're on a call with the developers in the Philippines at 5 a.m. and they're like teaching you about Python, the language of coding, and you're like, God, rewind 20 years ago, I was a knuckle dragger in the Philippines hunting, people in the Southern Philippines. Right now I'm being taught web development by them. So and I think that kind of challenge and growth in taking on new endeavors is really essentially we learn through challenge, we learn through failure, we learn, and that's how we grow. And, but again, Guild for me, if I look way back in my life, my first decade was really devoted to military service. My first working decade, my 20s, were devoted to military service and deploying downrange and doing the thing, right? And then the next decade, I was still in the reserves, but my civilian career was really focused on media. So I went from the military to the media. And in this third decade of work, those two have kind of come together, and I'm really focused on money, because one of the things that I realized is it's really important to have a sense of purpose, right? But also for the military community, which in large part has been left behind by the private wealth community, it's also important to pay attention to purse, right? And I'm sure you have had, when you were a young junior officer, right? You probably had guys in your battalion, or in your company who got that first regular paycheck, and they went out there and they bought that Mustang at the Ville at 25% interest. Right, with that, we got those stories for days, right? Sure. And I realized that financial literacy in the military could use some tailwinds from the civilian sector and from the private sector, and so that's what we're doing. We launched this company. It's a self-directed investing platform designed for the military community, and we believe that financial literacy is so critical that we'll actually pay you to do financial training. So you go on our application and you watch a little video on savings versus investing, 1 minute video, we'll put $5 in your brokerage account to start trading. And we think it's really important to build, to be in charge of your financial future, because that's essential, whether you're still active duty, whether you're transitioning out of the military, or whether you're a veteran who's been out for 10 years and you're a sophisticated investor. We kind of want to give those tools, and we oriented it. My founding team are 2 naval intel officers and myself, right? So it's a military experience. Like when you make your first trade, you get a ribbon that looks like the National Defense Ribbon.
That's cool.
Yeah, all that stuff. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
And I like how you've tied in so many different elements of those 3 different decades into this, and constantly changing your language, right? Python in the Philippines meant something totally different when you were there, trying not to get them wrapped up around you. Now you're all wrapped up in Python in the Philippines again, but it's a completely different sense.
Yeah, and we have to evolve as humans, right? That is, life is dynamic, right? If we learned anything over these past crazy 2.5 years, is that life is dynamic and unpredictable, right? So the old Semper Gumby, always flexible, willing to improve and learn ourselves. I think that kind of adaptability and learning is essential to success in life.
Absolutely. Would you say that belief in that flexibility has really greatly improved your life the most?
I do. I think it's related to this sort of semi-amorphous concept when we talk about resilience, right? Obviously, Tony, you and I have discussed this in the veteran community, and even in the active duty community. We've been at war for 2 decades, right? That's created a lot of trauma, and it's created a lot of issues within the veterans community. So we're constantly asking ourselves, how do we build resilience both within a community and within individuals? I would even make the argument that certain elements of design and urban planning are looking at resiliency in buildings, right? Like you saw that that crazy disaster in Florida where the building collapsed or whatever, right? That building was so rigid that it didn't bend, it broke, right? So even in like design centric thinking now, they're thinking about this concept of resiliency. So I have been really focused on how we build resiliency into systems, right? And I've just taken that kind of thinking and I've oriented it now towards financial planning and towards financial health and literacy and wellness, thinking how do we build robust, resilient financial systems for our military community. And like anything else, it sounds, a little plebeian, but ultimately the idea is education and getting people to understand more and to take control of their own future.
And that education piece is so essential. Both of us have been very privileged to go to elite institutions and learn from the best in the world. But being able to take what you learn as a subject matter expert and then deliver that to other people and really break it down. I mean, that's why we love people. You can go down the list of famous thinkers who have really been able to break down things, Feynman, the whole list. And that's essentially what you're doing here with Gil.
Totally. Although I have to admit, I was just still like stuck and laughing about the Ivy League letting us two knuckle draggers walk through those gilded doors.
Those Holland halls, and they're like, "What? Are you sure you didn't get into Cornell?" Nope, yeah. I'm here.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And look, everything that I do is mission oriented. And if you look, it's not just me who's recognized this as a critical issue. I'm sure you're seeing it in the Army currently, but it's true. It's ubiquitous across all branches of service, across military and veteran community. But DoD itself has said that financial readiness is the number one household stressor. 65% of households say that financial distress is the number one priority, and so it affects readiness. It affects the health and wellness of the military community. So DoD has recognized that, and we're trying to do our little small piece to help people along that path and that journey. And it's fun. I mean, you're on it, right? Like you got on the platform?
I am absolutely on the platform.
We got to get you traded, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we already are, right? As soon as I got on, like you said, you hooked it up, and I was able to just get on there and start doing my thing. And it was a snap. Like I have gone through a lot of different things, a lot of different onboarding, and literally no issues. It was great.
Yeah. Well, I will see you on the leaderboard is what we like to say. Us like CrossFit guys, us competitive athletes, like we need a leaderboard. We need to measure how we're doing.
Absolutely, because you were the owner and founder of CrossFit Santa Monica, right? Like one
Absolutely.
of the first CrossFit gyms ever.
Well, so my path with CrossFit is super interesting because you're a CrossFit guy, right? Yeah. So I'm actually from Santa Cruz originally. So I went to the very first CrossFit gym with Coach Glassman. And when I was home on leave, I would come back and I would work out at the gym. And there was actually a bunch of other frogmen who were down at the Naval Post Grad School in Monterey. And I would like drag them up and I'd be like, hey, you guys got to come check this workout out. And then we'd all like go through some dick dragger workout. We'd be dying on the floor, right? And then we slowly started bringing it back to our individual like teams and platoons. And it sort of started to, there was a couple entry points in the SEAL teams, but that was one of the early entry points of cross-pollinating CrossFit into the NSW community.
Absolutely. I didn't know that. That is fascinating.
And then later on as a civilian, or when I was a reservist, I opened CrossFit Santa Monica in 2013. And wonderful place. And as you know, the sense of community that you get when you build a brick and mortar institution like that, it's kind of second to none.
Right. And like you're able to, it really comes down to that sense of community, right? Whether you're a leader in the military or you're an entrepreneur, you really have to, once you are able to foster a sense of community, the sky's the limit. You're really untouchable at that point because you have everyone's working on that in their purpose. They're driven on that same mission.
Yeah, and really in CrossFit, what's so cool and neat about it, and I use CrossFit as like just a broad catch-all for, functional fitness, things that make you lighter, leaner, stronger, faster, whatever your goals are. What I found is what works for me is that I feel like I'm on a constant quest for self-improvement, right? I want to be, to borrow from our 10,000 brethren, a little bit better every day. And CrossFit was like an amazing way to help imbue that philosophy into a community of people around me. And, people like, they take to it like a duck to water. Like, people are hungry for self-improvement, right? Like, as you know, that's your quest also, right? Is to give people tools and training and ideas to help them on this journey of self-improvement. And it's so nice to use CrossFit, or at least the gym, as kind of a laboratory to do that.
Yeah, and it allows for that character development to, like, I talk about resiliency building, like that's where it occurs, where you're, only little 5 minutes into a 20-minute workout, and you're like, I got to push through, right? Because I know I can be better than I was yesterday, to take from what, 10,000, what you were just saying. Along the way, as we build resiliency, though, we're presented a lot with failure and adversity. Where has a failure really come in your life that has shaped ultimately a great success?
I think I think failure is like an essential part of growth. Like, you can't do it.
Absolutely.
I wrote down a bunch of notes for a book when I was at Harvard. When John F. Kennedy was at Harvard, he wrote a book that was called Profiles in Courage, and he profiled 5 political leaders who had undergone courageous political acts in sort of defiance of the norms at that time, and that resulted in some great result. And when I was at Harvard, I wrote a draft of a book that was about profiles in failure, about people who had epic failures and then had to overcome them. A small example was, Al Gore, who lost the 2000 presidency. He sort of like went into a cave, grew his beard long, right? And then he like reemerged to like win an Academy Award, win a Nobel Peace Prize, like all of this stuff. And he sort of overcame his failure, which was failing to win the 2000 election. He overcame his failure by like going internal and finding a new sense of purpose on environmentalism, right? And I thought that process was really cool and interesting. So I think whether, like, for me personally, like, failure in, like, to get like a PR, like if you're doing like a hang clean or something, right. You're like, okay, I dropped the weight, it smashed, it made a loud noise, like failed, right? Everything from like a micro failure like that to I got a C in accounting, and that's a gentleman's C in accounting at Harvard. Like, yeah. It was just like the double bounce. It was like the driest, like most, and partially I was like, I'm never going to use this shit, so I was doing like horrible in that class, barely passing, like a C is barely passing. And I was never going to, I like eked by, right? Danger close to actual failure on that. Anyways, fast forward like several years later, right? Now I'm an entrepreneur, and like all of a sudden I actually have to understand the balance sheet and EBITDA and all this stuff.
It's your whole life. Yeah.
It's everything. So it forced me to like jump back in, like relearn like what I had almost failed at, right? But I had this like great solid base, right? So even though I was terrible at something then, when I actually had to put it into use pragmatically and practically, it allowed me. And so like, look, I sucked at it in academics, but in the real world, like I've embraced it.
I love that. And we can all relate to that, in the academic setting. Kaj, thank you for being here. But before we go, I have to ask you our final question. You talked about purpose, servant leadership, focusing on the mission, but how are you, Kaj Larsen, better today than yesterday?
Well, I'm better every day, specifically today. One, for having had the ability to like reach an audience, thanks to you, Tony, and to like discussing these ideas. That's a great honor for me. That's a way of giving back, and it's a reminder of this dedication and mission to service. So I feel better like that. I feel like that I'm better yesterday. Better today than I am yesterday, because I had that platform to speak to people. So that's really wonderful. other than that, I just got back from Mexico, and I was cleaning and scrubbing all of my spearfishing gear. Right, take care of your gear takes care of you. And while I was doing that, I was reminded of how critical it is to have. I was thinking about being back in the teams, and how we had this mantra of like when you come back from a mission, right? Team gear, personal gear, person, right? And I realized as I was like cleaning my gear today that idea was so applicable in so many domains of life, right? Yeah. You come back, like whether you're working in a company and the first thing you do is you make sure that your company and mission first, right? Then you take care of whatever level your unit is, unit level. And then when all of that is done, make sure that includes making sure that all your guys and gals and all the people who are working for you or with you are taken care of. And then finally, you take care of yourself, right? And I'd sort of forgotten about that until I was like scrubbing off my spear gun today. I was like, oh yeah, team gear, personal gear, person, right? I'm going to carry that one with me. So drag that one out of the archives, and I think it's still good and applicable today.
That absolutely is, and that essentially wraps up the episode. I knew you were going to do it. I knew it was going to come where you're going to somehow tie everything together. I didn't know how you were, and you delivered as always. Kaj, where can people go to reach out, connect, talk to you if they have any questions? I know you got second season of The Right Fit coming out soon.
Yep. So that's my podcast with my sister, and probably like good starting point always is either my personal webpage, which is, KajLarsen.com, and that's Larsen with an E, my Scandinavian heritage. So KajLarsen.com. Most people honestly find me on Instagram, where I'm pretty active. I like to post a lot of stuff about the ocean and about the marine environment and stuff like that. But I'm also increasingly posting about the work that we're doing at Guild. You can find out more about Guild at the Guild website, guild.financial. We have this awesome launch video that's shot on the battleship Missouri, the battleship New Jersey, and then you can check that out. You can also download that platform in the App Store, iOS, or in the Google Play Store. If you're on an Android, so you can download that platform, check it out. If people DM me on Instagram, I'll give you my founder's code, gets you a little cash to get started in your brokerage account, and people can make their first trade and get going on their path to financial freedom.
And we can see everybody on the leaderboard because Sixers are always trying to be better than yesterday. So absolutely, Kaj, again, thank you so much for your time, sharing your stories from all the different lives that you've been able to live, giving back to us, the listeners, because I just sat back and I was just taking it all in. So I appreciate that. And of course, thanks for having our six.
Yeah, absolutely. Got your six. I love it.
I don't know what you've been told, Sixers, but the lawyers would like us to remind you that the views, opinions, and comments expressed on the Got Your Six podcast are solely those of the hosts or guests, to include current and previous Department of Defense employees, and should in no way be considered the opinions of or endorsements on behalf of the Department of Defense or any of its components, divisions, contractors, or other current and previous staff members.